So when it comes to allocating parental responsibilities, it's really, really important that you understand it's going to happen in one of two ways, okay? The first is you're going to reach an agreement. The second is the judge is going to make a decision. What I think is really important is you try to do everything possible to keep it under an agreement. That means at least you know what the outcome's going to be, because you don't want to leave that decision to somebody that barely knows you and barely knows your child. But let's say that you can't do that and that you have to put this in the judge's hands. You need to understand this is where the best interest of the child factors come into play. The judge is going to consider all of the things that have happened in your case. It's not any one factor. It's also important that even though there are several factors listed out there, it's not a score. So we're not just trying to tally them all up and have you come up with the most points, if you will, under these factors. The court is ultimately going to consider the totality of the circumstances, identify each one of these factors, and then make the best decision that the judge thinks for your child. You may or may not agree with that. So that's why we try to help you to reach an agreement when it comes to your kids. So when it comes to your past involvement with your child's life, that's going to be a factor that the courts are going to consider. In other words, in the preceding months leading up to this case, who is taking the kids to the doctors? Who is doing all those appointments? That's something that the court will absolutely consider. Now, just because you were the parent that was doing it or the parent that wasn't doing it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be how the determination is made in your situation. It's a factor. Now, it's very common in a marriage for parties to come up with some sort of agreements on these things, whether it's spoken or unspoken. It's common for one parent to take the children to certain places, to pick them up from certain places. These are parts of an agreement that couples make. Now that you're getting divorced, if you want to be involved in those things, you now have to make changes to your life. So if you want to be the parent that takes them to the doctors, to take them to the activities, does your schedule even allow for that? So it's important that you understand the past is going to be part of the decision, but really going forward and what is possible is going to be an important thing for the court to consider. So when it comes to parenting time, one of the biggest factors is schedules. Let's face it, your schedule is important. Your spouse's schedule, important. Your kid's schedule, important. Another thing that's important to consider is proximity. Where do you live? Where does your spouse live? Where do your kids go to school? Where are their activities? These factors are really important when it comes to coming up with a plan that makes sense for your kids. Let's talk about work schedules. If you have to work early in the morning, that's not a bad thing if you're married and you have somebody to help take care of your kids. Now, if you are getting divorced and you have to work very early in the morning, it may impact your ability to have your children overnight. Let's talk about an example here. Let's say that you have to be at your work site by 6 a.m. That means you have to leave your home between 5 and 5:30 every day. That's not a bad thing. However, if you are having your children overnight, that means you might be leaving your children home alone, or a third party would have to be present in order for you to make that happen. Now, if the other spouse is available to be with the children, a court's probably not going to force that situation. In other words, I've had to have really hard conversations with clients before to say, if you want to have your children overnight during the week and you have to leave work every day, you may have to consider getting a new job. The reality is, go in and talk to your boss. Ask them, is there any way that I could work later on certain days of the week? See if that's even possible before you decide that you're going to give up on having your kids or not. The best thing that you can do, though, is make a conscious decision. What's the most important thing to you? Having that overnight parenting time or keeping the job you have? I'm not saying one is right or wrong, but just be honest with yourself and try to make that happen. Because the court absolutely is going to consider your work schedule. It's going to consider your spouse's schedule. It's also going to consider your kids. How far away do you live? The reality is, if you guys live close by, a schedule where you're having more interaction or more frequent parenting time is more likely than if you live an hour away. If you live an hour away, it's very difficult to have the kids with you. Even if you do work later, if you've got to wake up an extra hour and drive an hour just to get them to school, a court's probably not going to force that to happen. So I would say to you in that situation, consider moving closer. Decide what's important and then make that plan happen. Let's talk about sole decision making, sole allocation, or sole custody as it's sometimes called. This happens in a few situations. One, where you have an absent parent, so one party that's not around at all. In that situation, it becomes pretty easy for the court to make that decision. This parent is here, I'm going to give them all the decisions. The second, and this one is a little bit more common, is when the parties simply cannot agree on simple things. They look outside, and if one of them says, "What a beautiful blue sky," the other one simply can't agree. They can't agree the sky is blue and grass is green, and therefore every decision gets dragged on. It's very common actually to see this happen post-decree, which means after the divorce. Sometimes people will try to get through a divorce. They'll say we can do these things jointly, but then they realize we can't do it. It's not working. And under those circumstances, a party can come back to the court and say, we have tried every single time we have a major decision, we're going through mediation, we can't reach an agreement. Somebody has to make these decisions. Now, if you're going to do that, be careful what you ask for because you might just get it. And that means if you go into court and say, you got to award the decision to one of us, that might mean you win. It might mean you lose. You have to be okay with whatever that outcome is.